In the years after the Bible John killings, a number of women came forward to claim that they had been sexually assaulted after attending the Barrowland Ballroom. One of these women, named Hannah Martin, claimed that she had been raped by Bible John and had given birth to a child by him, and had given birth to the child at the Glasgow Maternity Hospital in January of 1970. Now that DNA is a thing, this child was born in 1970. By the mid to late 1990s, was she aware of this story of her birth, or was this covered up? I don't know if her DNA was ever entered, and could they compare them to see if this was the same man. In April of 1969, Hannah Martin had gone to the Barrowland Ballroom. She ended up leaving the dance hall that night in the company of a man that she said fit the description of the man that later came out as this Bible John. She said that he offered her a ride home and that she accepted. And she became very terrified of this man. She said that he became sexually aggressive and that he forced her into having sex with him, that she became sick and threw up in his car, and that he became angry because she threw up in his car, and that he grabbed her and threw her out of the car and drove off, leaving her standing in the street. They're saying now that her daughter, this daughter that she gave birth to, that she said was the result of this attack, they're saying that now she could be the clue to solving this. In 1996, police exhumed the body of John Irvin McGinnis from a graveyard in South Glasgow. McGinnis had served in the Scots Guards. Here we go, police connection. He had served as a Scots Guard and had died in 1980 at the age of 41. Now, he was the cousin of one of the original suspects in the Bible John investigation, and he was related to a senior police officer. This goes back to the original theory that the local law enforcement had, that somebody knew something and was keeping this hush-hush, keeping this quiet, and helping this man escape. They exhumed this man's body, who claimed that he was the cousin of one of the original suspects. They took DNA from this McGinnis's body and used it in comparison to the rape of Helen Puttick. The results were inconclusive. So this led them to believe that there was another serial killer by the name of Peter Tobin. Criminologists and investigators often wondered if convicted serial killer Peter Tobin may have been Bible John. Tobin was convicted in 2007 of a murder in 2006 of a Polish student named Angelika Kluk. She had been raped, beaten, and stabbed to death. This is what led them to believe that he may also have been the Bible John. They said that he was a drifter and that he was known to hang around Catholic churches and Catholic priests. He did odd jobs around these churches and did odd jobs for these priests. It's just how he came to quote and speak about the Bible. Tobin attacked Kluk so ferociously he hid her body and fled to London prior to his arrest. However, one discrepancy is that Bible John left his victims' bodies in places where he raped them. He didn't try to remove their bodies or hide their bodies. And Tobin was known to have hidden all of his victims and buried their bodies. There was some visual similarities between Peter Tobin and the composite drawing of Bible John. In addition, now this is something that I completely just didn't link to this Bible John at all. The three ex-wives of this Peter Tobin all gave accounts of being repeatedly beaten and raped and throttled and imprisoned by him. The reason I didn't put that with this Bible John murderer is because he attacked his victims quickly. He didn't. He could have kidnapped them. He could have, instead of taking them back to their homes, he could have taken them somewhere else, held them, tortured them for days or weeks, but he didn't do that. I'm sure that they went through torture during their murders, but he didn't torture them repeatedly over time. One of the reasons that they said that they suspected this Peter Tobin is that he would often become angry and lash out at his wives while they were having their menstrual cycle. That this would make him very angry, and that it was during these times when he would abuse them. Detectives believe a forensic link between Peter Tobin and any of the murder victims linked to Bible John is unlikely. And Tobin has since been eliminated as a suspect. Tobin's DNA was checked against samples left by Bible John during the rapes, and the result conclusively proved that this was not Peter Tobin. The doubts surrounding the DNA notwithstanding, police also have a record of the bite mark found on Helen Puttick's body, which they cross-checked with Tobin's dental work. And they had done the same thing with this John McInnes, and these were both eliminated as suspects. These young police officers who were involved in this investigation early on believed that there was a cover-up and that somebody within their own police force knew who this person was. No further murder victims in Scotland or anywhere else in the United Kingdom have been attributed to Bible John, and the manhunt for this murderer was one of the most extensive manhunts in Scotland's criminal history. The murders of these three women remain unsolved. The case remains open, with many investigators remaining hopeful that DNA may solve this case at some point. In 2004, police announced their intentions to genetically test a number of men in a further attempt to identify the perpetrator. With all individuals concerned being requested to submit blood samples, this endeavor followed the previous discovery that an 80% genetic match from semen samples retrieved from the final crime scene of Bible John, which would have been Helen Puttick, with a DNA sample retrieved at the site of another crime committed 2 years earlier. No witness ever to have engaged in a conversation with Bible John, Jean Langford, died in September of 2010. Langford had given police the description used to complete the second composite drawing. This remains the most significant clue to this day. Journalist Audrey Gillen reassesses the case to find out who these women were and tell their forgotten stories. The title of this is Bible John, the Forgotten Women at the Heart of a Serial Killer Mystery. I was in shock as I began to read through them. Detectives who investigated this at the time of these crimes described these women as being highly promiscuous, saying things like they were fond of male attention. It was blatant misogyny. These were victims of a murderer being described as harlots and promiscuous women who were out seeking the attention of men. Now, we all know, if you go back through the history of rape, that women often got blamed for their attacks, and in some ways they still do. How were they dressed? Were they out alone? Were they known to go to nightclubs or that type of thing? It's almost as though they were being described as they wanted it. They deserved it, I guess. Because they had gone out dancing and maybe they had a drink, they were described as they were being judged for what happened to them. So this person decided they deserved to be told who these women were. Not just they were a couple of women who went out dancing one night and came into contact with a person who decided to kill them, rape them, and kill them. So we go first to Patricia, who was Patricia Charlotte Wilson Docker. She was 25 years old. She was the daughter of a Royal Air Force electronics engineer. As a child, she had lived in, her father was in the military, and they went to Singapore. They lived in Singapore. At the age of 19, she married Alexander Docker, who was also in the military. He was a senior aircraftman with the Royal Air Force. They had a son named Sandy. She had a babysitter who described her as a really nice lady and said she enjoyed getting dressed up. She always liked to wear nice dresses and suits. She recalled going with them to trips to the beach to take the little boy to swim. And she said that Patricia loved to watch the TV show Dr. Kildare and talked about becoming a nurse. She also said that the Docker's marriage was in trouble and that the couple separated. In April of 1969, she returned to Glasgow, where she became an auxiliary nurse working night shift. Her mother often took care of her little boy while she was at work. One night a week, Patricia would take off and go to a dance club and dance. The police report on her death is written in the same judgmental, misogynistic language that says she enjoyed the company of men and described her as an only child who was rather spoiled. There is very little detail about what happened to her during the night that she went out. After leaving the flat with her parents, where she lived with her parents, she was wearing a mustard-colored knit dress and a duffel coat. Her body was discovered lying in the doorway of a garage, and her clothes were removed. Her son changed his name, and his life was upended when his mother was murdered. He was taken away from Glasgow by his father, who was still in the Air Force and had a new partner in his life. I don't have a really clear memory of it, but I can hear my mother's laughing voice. That is the only real memory I have of her. Alex is the name that he took. In a way, this whole thing is just like a little box inside my mind that is labeled "Do Not Open." The horror of the death of my mother. My imagination goes to places I wish it wouldn't. The knowledge that I was only a matter of yards away sleeping when this happened. And the other thing is my grandparents' lives were hollowed immediately. They lost their only beloved child, and then me within just a matter of days. His father came and got him. I'll go on to the next woman. Her name was Jemima Ramsey Gibson McDonald, and she was 31 years old. This is the woman that I could find the least about. On the night she died, she had dressed up in a frilly blouse and skirt. She was found by her sister lying in a building next door to the tenement flat that she shared with her 3 children. But the story of her life seemed to have disappeared. I knew her family described her that she liked to go out dancing, and she came from a big family. The police say her eldest child was a girl. Her father was from Yugoslavia. Jemima had 2 sons. Police notes say Jemima appeared to be clean and her home and children were well cared for. Child welfare officials took the oldest daughter to a residential home and her brothers were taken to another. One minute their lives were normal. They were living together as a family with their mother just down the street from their aunt, who often took care of them. I later discovered that the 2 boys had changed their last name. Their father had changed his last name, so that the 2 boys took on their father's new name. And I don't know if the girl's father was in her life or anything about her. I was stunned to find that Eldridge Motley was alive and living in Manchester. He knew Jemima as Mima, and they had been separated when their boys were little. She never used to walk. She always liked to skip and jump, he said, almost a run. We instantly hit it off. It was as simple as that. She was absolutely immaculate. She gave me 2 lovely sons, and they have been a credit to me, he said. One of his sons recalled a time that his mother got all 3 of the children out of bed to watch the moon landings. He came to see me in Glasgow with his wife and his daughter. Nothing was ever explained to us, he said. That's probably why we don't really think that much about it, because we just had to get on with our lives. Something happened to her. One minute she's there and the next minute she's gone. And the boys apparently did end up going to live with their dad. I guess once he found out what had happened and that his sons had been put into some type of foster home, he went and got them. Now, in the notes of the police, it is described as, she appeared to be extremely fond of male company, the report said, as she had gone out to the Barrowland dance hall 3 nights in a row. However, her sister discredits that and says that she babysat for the children when their mother would be gone, and that this was the night that she kept them, that she had not gone out. They also described that she was a lady who was receiving public funds. So she was on some type of government welfare, and I guess that they felt like it's as if the police were saying she shouldn't have been allowed to have any kind of a life because she was single and relying on some public assistance. One of the sons said that his mother did not leave them very often and that this was not normal for her, that she didn't go out night after night. We were well looked after, and we had not only our aunt down the street, but a family next door that would come in and out of each other's homes as if we were family. The last woman's name was Helen Gowans Puttick. She was 29 years old. Helen had gone to the Barrowland with her sister Jean on the night that she was murdered. Now, Jean turned out to be a crucial surviving witness. In 1996, I interviewed Jean, and she told me that her sister was always called Ellen and that she was very good looking and she loved to dance. On the day that they went out dancing, earlier that day, Ellen had gone to a local shop and bought a dress with gold buttons up the front. Jean said her sister was tall and she liked to dress well. She decided to wear the dress that night with a fake fur print coat. She met her husband, George Puttick, who was a lance corporal in the Royal Corps of Signals. They were 23 years old when they married in 1964. They had 2 children, David and Michael. George was sent to Germany and his family followed, but Helen didn't like it there and returned to live with her mother in Glasgow in mid-March of 1969. Now, her sister Jean was the one that was in the taxi cab with her and this man that she described as Bible John. Her death ruined our entire family. George took the kids and moved to England. My mother never got over it, said Jean. While over 5,000 people were interviewed by the police, no arrests were made. One suspect's body was exhumed after the case was reopened in 1995, but this person was eliminated because of a failure to link him through DNA. It's been more than 5 decades since these women were killed. It left a lot of suffering from the survivors of these women. And this person just wanted to share this about them because so much had been talked about the killer, but very little had been talked about these women. And when they discovered the notes by the police, as though these women were just in seeking male attention and promiscuous, it angered them to the point that they felt like that these women's names needed to be talked about in a positive light and to tell who they were. Now, to believe that a man targeted these women and raped them and murdered them in this brutal way and then just stopped all of a sudden after his third kill is probably very unlikely. And it's probably likely that he left the area after this last encounter that he had with this Helen Puttick when she put up such a fight. And the bus conductor said that it appeared that his face was scratched and bloody. It's possible that she had scratched him enough to the point that it may have left a scar on his face. And he may have left the area at that time knowing that if he went back to the same ballroom, to these same locations, that people would start to wonder about this scar on his face. So maybe he moved on, and maybe he moved on to another area in the United Kingdom or elsewhere. DNA from other murders may link him one day back to these murders. So in this last part of the series about Bible John, I'm going to read from a story from the BBC News, and this is dated 2023. Police are examining new revelations about 3 unsolved murders as a result of a podcast called Bible John, Creation of a Serial Killer. The award-winning podcast investigated the murders of Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald, and Helen Puttick. All 3 women were killed after a night out at the Barrowland Ballroom. Something that wasn't brought up here was who was the owners of this Barrowland Ballroom and what were their connections to the community? Did they have police connections? I'm not going to get into all of the hearsay and rumors and possibilities of organized crime, but it is a known fact that places like this, ballrooms and dance halls and places that served alcohol, were known to be policed by or controlled or indebted to, if you want to call it that, organized crime at times throughout history. So could this have been something, one reason why the police didn't really go down there and pound on the door and try to find out, and they did say that the police were putting people out to go undercover at this ballroom. But as time went on and people started to believe that this could have been a police cover-up, was it possible that this person was being tipped off as to when the police were there and when they weren't? So in the last part of the story, I talked about how Helen Puttick had gotten a ride in a taxi cab home with her sister that night, along with this man believed to be Bible John. And the sister gave great detail to the police about this man. She talked about the type of suit that he wore, the way he talked, and the things that he talked about. And she helped to create this profile of this man and this last rendering, this artist rendering of what he looked like. And so in the podcast, they start talking about this John Irvin McInnes. Now, he was a cousin to a senior police officer. Now, in the earlier story, I touched on the fact that a woman claimed to have been raped by a man that she thought was Bible John, and she gave birth to a daughter as a result of that attack. A police spokesperson said, "We are assessing the contents of the recent podcast." The murders of these women have remained unresolved over the years, and the families of the serial killer victims said they'd recently been told that information from the podcast had triggered new lines of inquiry by the police. A tiny DNA sample recovered from the waistband of Miss Puttick's tights led to a new team coming out. It was like a cold case, come out to reinvestigate this DNA. The Scotland podcast came out at the end of 2022, and journalist Audrey Gillian spoke to senior detectives, and they reopened the case. Miss Puttick was the third victim and the last one to be seen alive with the man on October 30th, 1969. The detectives said their investigation found enough evidence that John Irvin McInnes killed himself in 1980, was the man in the taxi cab with her, and they would have issued an arrest warrant for him if he had still been alive. However, they believe that Senior Police Chief Joe Betty, who led the inquiry, kept his name out of the investigation because he was good friends with the suspect's cousin, Jimmy McInnes. As a result of the 1995 review, John Irvin McInnes' body was exhumed so that they could retrieve DNA. And they wanted to test this DNA against the DNA found on Miss Puttick's clothing. But there was no match, and experts later announced that the results were inconclusive. Now, this writer, a true crime writer, said that a former printer called John Templeton is the perpetrator of the unsolved murders. She claims that this man is Bible John. This is from 2024. Police are assessing new claims by an author that she has identified the Bible John killer as a man named John Templeton. This author's name is Jill Baven Mizzi, M-I-C-C-I. She's a writer from Australia. She is convinced that this John Templeton was the killer of these women and was Bible John. Now, John Templeton died in 2015. He died at the age of 70 in 2015, and he bears a striking resemblance to the artist's sketch of the killer. So, a copy of this book was sent to the police in Glasgow, and they wanted them to look into this. This author traced Templeton after looking at the ancestry of John McInnes, who was identified as a suspect in 1996, and he had been interviewed about Puttick's murder. DNA since obtained from Puttick's clothing bore comparisons to samples provided by McInnes' siblings. So when they say that they matched the DNA 80%, they matched the DNA found on her clothing to his sister and brother. Enough of a match that it was enough to look into, enough for them to investigate a connection. But when his body was exhumed, there was no conclusive match. This led this author, Baven Mizzi, to question if the person who left the DNA samples may have been connected to the family in another way. So she did a detailed genealogical search of the McInnes family tree. and this led her to John Templeton. Now, the man did tell the women in the cab that night that his name was John. But she did this, and she came up with this John Templeton. He was born in 1945. Now, after doing this genealogical search, this author tracked down Templeton's ex-wife, and she gave a photograph of him that bore a strong resemblance to the artist's drawing. Templeton's ex-wife revealed that her husband was interviewed 6 months after Puttick's murder. Templeton looked so much like the description, down to the hair color, the height, and that this Sister Jean gave to the police. He bore a striking resemblance to her description of this man. A new suspect, and this is from the BBC, a new suspect in the Bible John murders has been identified for the first time after being linked to the cold case. Now go back to the earlier part of this, when they had taken the DNA from the family members of this John McInnes, and they got enough of a match to say that the DNA found on Helen Puttick's clothes was to someone kin to this McInnes. But when they exhumed his body, they found no conclusive match, which is very odd. But he has been named as the alleged killer of Helen Puttick. Templeton died in 2015, but investigation showed he shared a DNA profile and a family connection to the prime suspect, John Irvin McInnes. So she was so convinced that John Templeton was Bible John that she brought all this evidence to the police and wanted them to really search and look into this. I don't know how much the police looked into this John Templeton, and he was already deceased when this woman came up with this information, when she came up with this. And he was questioned. His ex-wife says that he was questioned by the police during the time. He was born in 1945. He would have been in his mid-20s at the time of these murders. And so she really believes that he is the killer. His height, weight, hair, his age, everything fit the description. And he looked so much like the man in the artist's rendering. So she says the same thing that I said in the early part of this story, was that Bible John didn't go to this club because he wanted to go there and enjoy himself. He was stalking women. He was going there and he was talking to different women, and I'm sure that he probably talked to quite a few people there. He had this hatred and this just desire to put out his own project his own thoughts about married women and people going out to drink and that type of thing, that he was just targeting women going to this club. And all three of these women had similarities. They were all dark hair. They were all married or separated. They all had children. And he said that he worked in a lab. Now remember, my theory early on was that he worked in some type of something to do with a medical or pharmaceutical. Now, as a child, he had been living with another family. He wasn't living with his family, and he was considered a foster child. Maybe this was his hatred toward women. Maybe his mother had left his father, and this was how he ended up in foster care. And he had this hatred toward women because of this. John Templeton was cremated, but they say that they would be able to get some DNA because he had left behind some of his possessions that his family still had. I think the reason that the police are having trouble now concluding that this was one serial killer of all three of these women, and possible others in the area, was that there was so much covered up at the time. so much that was left out. It wasn't included in any reports, that they can't find that now because it was never added. And that these women were being victim blamed. So the police taking these statements and writing down these reports about these women were demonizing them as these harlots who were just out on the town. And they didn't really care that these women were murdered, and they didn't care that these were moms and daughters and wives and sisters. Alan Motley was the youngest son of Jemima McDonald, and he said when the police officer phoned and said they were going to reinvestigate, it was quite a bit of a bombshell. They might openly admit that these murders were not investigated properly in the first place. Now, he says that he wants a police apology, a public police apology, that these women were talked about as though they were just street women, that they were just out partying and having a good time every night and leaving their kids, and all they were interested in was alcohol and men. And these were the victims of an attack, of a murder, and they were being talked about in this way. And he says if it does come to be that this was a police cover-up, and this man was related to police officers, that he thinks that they should issue a public apology. He says that he thinks that it should be a part of the investigation. He just wants the police, if it turns out that this was the man and that they were covering up, he wants them to come out and say and admit to that. At the end of the day, the families lost loved ones, and this was a ripple effect on the families. Alex was taken away from his grandparents and went to live with his father in another country. Helen's mother never recovered from the death of her daughter. She moved out of Glasgow and never set foot in that city again, even for one day. The high-profile investigation into the murders was one of the largest Scotland ever seen, and it would remain unsolved all these years later. It's been 50 years. Police say that they interviewed over 7,000 people. However, no arrests were ever made. When it ever is solved and they finally do say this was who was responsible, I will come back and do a follow-up on this. But as of right now, I think there's elements in the police force, even to this day, so many years later, that are wanting to protect the police, wanting to protect their reputation and their name, and protect these men who came before them, that they're willing to just say, this was not the same person. We weren't allowing a serial killer to walk the streets. We weren't covering up the fact that a man was out killing women. I'll wrap this up just by saying, as of right now, this is the closest match that they've come, this John Templeton. Maybe more will come out about him later. Maybe they will be able to conclude that he was the killer. Thanks for watching.